Добрый день.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are having the Belarus Economy Monitor. Those of you who attend our events regularly know our presenters. If you have any questions, please ask them in the Zoom chat or in the YouTube channel broadcast. I'm happy to give the floor to Violetta Panasevich in order for her to dwell on the sentiment of Belarusian households. Thank you, Olga. Thank you very much. Please launch my presentation today. As always, I'm going to be speaking about income and consumer confidence of Belarusian households. Our analysis is based on a survey. The survey took place in July 2024, and the clicker is not operational here. Okay. This was an online survey, urban residents, and there was the sample that corresponded to the structure of the general aggregate population of Belarusians by sex, regions, and age. Let's start with reported income decrease. 26 respondents reported that, so this is a plateau in the indicator, and the share of respondents who have decreasing income is the smallest in recent quarters. Mostly this happens because of higher prices. Over a half of respondents refer to that. The next factor is the reducing number of clients and orders. And if we look at it at more detail, we can see that it is evident that these are entrepreneurs. Foreign exchange rate fluctuations are no longer the reason for declining income. In the second figure on the right, you can see that if we remove the influence of the foreign exchange rate and the price growth factor, then the share of people who have witnessed income decrease was 17%. If we ask those 26% of how they coped with falling incomes, then we can see that those who save on leisure are half of respondents. Surprisingly, among them, there is a significant share of people who work in agriculture and also in education, and also those who read state-owned media. And also, we have a smaller number of people buying new clothing or second-hand clothing is what prevails. We can see that saving on food is one of the negative ways to cope with falling incomes. And let's look at the labor market. This situation has stabilized here. There's reporting job loss is still about 2%, and speaking of jobless acquaintances is about 15%, which is significantly less than it was in 2021 and 2022, but this is higher than it was in October last year. About 57% of respondents report labor shortages in their sectors, and we can see this indicator growing from quarter to quarter. Next, let's look at the Consumer Confidence Index. It has 5 components. The first 2 components are about the economic situation in the country. We do not see any significant positive dynamics. The situation as it was in the previous 2 quarters. Still, half of respondents assess the economic situation as the situation that is improving or without changes. And speaking of the expectations, they are still uncertain, and 46% say the situation has either improved or still the same or will stay the same. The next 2 components are about the financial standing of households, and here we can see a positive trend. A growing number of respondents say that their financial standing has improved or unchanged versus last year. Last year, the situation was not the worst. Speaking of the expectations, respondents are more confident about their financial future. The majority say they expect this to improve or stay unchanged. And now, regarding the final component, which is called large purchases, so we can see that the majority of respondents believe that now is a good time for large purchases, or it's still the same as before. 27% of respondents believe that now is a favorable time for savings. We can see a positive trend in this indicator. Based on these 5 components, we build our consumer confidence index under the Rostat methodology. For the first time, Belarus is having -1, so this is a growth of 3.4 percentage points if compared to the previous quarter, but we cannot compare this with the Russian index because they have not presented the data for the last quarter, but they will publish it soon. Next, if we take one of the components, we can build this consumer confidence index under the Eurostat methodology. We can be happy about Belarus because it is in the transition zone. The index value is 0% here. There are disclaimers. Such an index does not mean that it will convert into a positive zone. This rarely happens. And second, this index is not seasonally adjusted. It is heavily influenced by seasons. Right now is summer, and we can expect that respondents and consumers have a better mood than before. Speaking of the European countries, the index has grown by 2% insignificantly. Speaking of Lithuania, it has strengthened in the positive zone of the index, and Poland got back to the boundary status. We have always said that Belarusian respondents value the financial standing of their families better than the economy of the country in general. But in recent quarters, we can see that this gap has shrinked. But this quarter, the gap has enlarged, but for a curious reason. A share of respondents reporting that the financial standing of their family is rather bad has dropped to 13%. This is the minimum value in all observation period. And about 44% assess the economics as the average situation. What people mean when we ask them about the financial standing of the country, and we ask them what indicators are important to you when you assess the economic situation of the country, and the level of prices is what they are guided by. 70% of them look at prices. The next factor is the foreign exchange rate. About 60% of respondents refer to that. And the third one, the most objective and understandable to respondents, the clearest indicator is the assessment of this situation in the economy through their own income or their family income. Other indicators are not that popular in assessing the economic situation in the country, but interestingly enough, that apart from the exchange rate of the Belarusian ruble, the respondents also follow the exchange rate of the Russian ruble. Over half of respondents follow the Russian ruble exchange rate. Let's look at the savings behavior and how it is influenced by expenditures. In recent quarters, we can clearly see that the desire to spend prevails over the desire to save. The majority of respondents keep saying that they have started spending more, or they spend as before, and 44% that they save either the same as before, or less, or a bit more. If we ask those 64% of respondents who actually save how they do this, what options are the most attractive, then the most popular option for savings is cash, either in foreign currency or in Belarusian rubles. Referring to foreign currencies, 90% of cases these are US dollars, and only 40% of those speak about euros. The next popular savings tool is a bank deposit, and the rest of the options are not preferred. If we ask all respondents how you would prefer saving if you had some spare cash, then the majority of them vote for cash in foreign currency, and they mostly speak about dollars, and only 40% refer to euros. And Belarusian respondents would like to save less in Russian rubles than they do at the moment. So the difference is 3 times. The next popular option for savings is to buy real estate in Belarus, and here we can see when the desire to save this way is very high, but the capacity is limited. The same refers to, let's say, cash in Belarusian rubles, or vice versa. The desire to save like that is very limited. However, about 46% of them refer to saving only in Belarusian rubles. Let's now discuss the dollarization factor. How Belarusians see their income and expenditures. We asked the question, when Belarusians think about expenditures, they think about this in dollars, euros, or Russian rubles. Some Belarusians don't do that. What do you do? A bit more than half of respondents, 57%, say that they either always or from time to time measure their income or expenses in foreign currencies, mostly US dollars. Only 5% refer to the Russian ruble, and 35% refer to euros, and 43% believe that measure their income or expenses only in Belarusian rubles. If we look at the cohorts of purchases that are perceived and seen through foreign currencies, then US dollars are used for measuring largest purchases: houses, real estate, cars, repairs of real estate, trips. Nobody pays for foreign trips in Belarusian rubles. Electronics, but this is divided. Part of consumers measure this in dollars, others in Belarusian rubles, and more frequent purchases, daily purchases, are perceived by respondents in Belarusian rubles and measured in Belarusian rubles. Like when we speak about small electronics, household electronics, food, and salaries. Another extra block that we decided to add to this survey, this is the final extra block, an institutional one, and this is about trust. Trust is measured frequently, but it depends on the sample. Back in 2017, the global value survey measured trust, and we covered all urban and rural residents, and it was a face-to-face interview. About 40% of respondents said that the majority of people can be trusted. In our survey, the share of those people dropped to 23%. However, this is not because of the trends in the society, but because of the type of the sample and the type of the survey. We had an online survey with urban citizens. However, we can look at the cohorts of trust of different people and institutions, and we can observe the following trends. Family members and friends of people. These people are trusted the most, and such an indicator as trust to neighbors has dropped compared to 2017. The same applies to people of different nationalities, other nationalities, and the newly met persons. Speaking of trust to institutions, the list is not comprehensive, but this list was used in WVS. The situation is as follows. Trust to police, the army, keep a high level, but it dropped versus 2017. Also, trust to such European or international structures like the UN, European Union, it was relatively small. Today it is even smaller. Speaking of the social protection system, unlike all other cohorts, this indicator of trust has improved. Next, let's discuss the institutions that are not mentioned in WVS. There are interesting details. Top one is the system of healthcare in Belarus, followed by the system of education. Speaking of the sources of information, then public media are trusted more than independent media or Russian media, and non-government or independent media should see this unpleasant news. They are trusted by only quarter of respondents, and there is a significant share of those who are challenged to answer the question, probably because people are afraid to respond to this question. Let's summarize. For the first time, the consumer confidence index amounted to 0% according to the Eurostat methodology. Respondents in Belarus still prefer to spend more than save. Speaking of savings, they prefer cash in foreign currency, dollars and Belarusian rubles. And speaking of spending, it is on the plateau, and if compared to 2017, the level of trust has dropped. Thank you. This is it. I'm passing the floor to my colleagues. Violetta, thank you. We are sorry to inform our YouTube presenters who were not able to watch our presentation in Russian language immediately. We fixed it all, and you will get a full recording in Russian by the end of the week. You can leave your questions, you can post your questions in Zoom chat or in our YouTube broadcasting. And now I'm passing the floor to Dzmitry Kruk, who will dwell on the macroeconomic situation in the economy. Hello, thank you very much. And as always, I'm going to report the macroeconomics trends in the real economy sector. I have three disclaimers. First, you will see some discrepancies with what Violetta reported, but this is because she presented the latest survey from July. And I'm going to refer to quarter 2 or even quarter 1 of 2024. You should also consider that the statistics and the perception of people can vary, and a traditional disclaimer, the figures for the last quarter for Q2 are not final. These are just estimates. Now, please let me move to the presentation. The key facts and the idea is explaining the things happening in the economy in Q2 are as follows. Just like in Q1, output growth continued accelerating. If we look at figures and facts of Q2, we can say that Q2 was one of the most positive ones, especially if we look at the real economic dynamics. As in previous periods, the driver of growth was domestic demand, but here we could see a slight change. In previous quarter, the burden of responsibility was taken by households, and today this is also contributed by the investment activity of firms. Household consumption is the key driver for what is going on in domestic demand, and still we can see the same relevance. This is what we have been talking for the last 2 years. Real salary growth growing faster than the productivity rate. This deteriorates the financial position of firms, and the key reason is the labor shortage. This factor continues affecting the economy. Important trends happened in foreign trade. On the one hand, there's a significant outburst in physical volumes. In the previous quarter, especially based on the dynamics of late 2023. I expressed my expectations that we actually had gotten to the maximum output volume. Then the data available today say that exports have skyrocketed, and we can see new highs since the moment after the full-fledged war outbroke, and imports followed exports, and we can say that the economic situation has not improved, and in nominal terms the economic situation is at the same level as before. In general, if we look retroactively, we can see that the trend is the gradual deterioration of the external position. If we look at the structure of production, the key growth donors, the key contributors are the processing industry enterprises, which was expected, followed by agriculture and construction sectors. And this is a novelty. I think that the labor market story is well known because this has been high on the agenda for the last 2 years. What are the reasons? How can we explain output growth? This is similar to our previous presentation. Therefore, I'm going to focus only on the new things which differentiate this from the previous quarter. And here I would highlight the positive external demand growth from Russia. This element has contributed, and I'm going to show this on graphs and figures. New peak, new outburst in the physical volumes of exports is an important component, but we can again predict. We can say that the maximum output has been achieved and Russian economy has been slowing down, and we have prerequisites to say that it will continue as it is today, but it is quite possible that the volume will drop, demand will drop, and exports will drop. An important trend of Q2 is a growing, visualizing barrier to growth, which is growing imports, and the list of macroeconomic disproportions, but the majority of them are similar to what we had a quarter ago, and I'm going to be speaking about new risks later. Now, these are the key trends. I have provided a preview of them, and I will show you these details. And in the end, we will discuss the future and future risks that are evident today. As said, gross domestic product has reached historical highs, and in Q2 we can say that we have left the corridor in which we stayed for many years, and today, if we look at the levels achieved, this is a new historical peak. Speaking of the dynamics of output, in Q2 we could see that blue bars here are quarter-to-quarter growth based on seasonally adjusted data. This is the snapshot speed of the economy. It shows the latest dynamics in Q2. So the economy was on the rise. And therefore, this is one of the positive trends that I should highlight if we look at facts and figures. At that, an important component is here. If we dive into the reasons and explanations of what has happened in the economy, we should highlight the divergence of two important quality indicators, labor and productivity. Considering that the economy grows in an environment of labor shortages, this has been growing, and due to the declining employment, But one of the key unknown factors for the future dynamics of the investment, please look at the yellow line. The return on capital indicator can be seen as a proxy, as one of the indicators whether the investment is favorable in the moment, and the trend turned in the second half of last year, and this is still relevant, which means that the efficiency of investment is downscaling. Therefore, artificial intensification of investment activity without focusing on the quality of investment will have the prerequisites for deteriorating this investment return. If we look at the structure of demand, what was the driver of growth? I will repeat, the key role, the key donor of growth was domestic demand. This is the red line in the graph. We can see what has happened. We can see even a larger responsibility of domestic demand for accelerating the dynamics of GDP. If we look at the external position, we cannot say that we have reached the critical limit, but this acceleration of domestic demand and its extreme overheating, especially as far as household consumption is concerned, this causes concerns for several quarters in a row, and this is one of the key characteristics of disproportions accumulated, and they predetermine the risks in future periods. In this graph, you can see the disaggregation by different elements. Domestic demand is broken down into household consumption, red bars, and the yellow bars are investments. In the previous quarter, there was an investment contribution. As investments grew in 2023, but then dropped in early 2024. Then we can see some positive trend in the investments. But still, we would like to see how this looks like in the longer term perspective. And this is the graph that I'm showing to you. The blue bar, the blue line, is the gross accumulation of capital. And this is starting from 2018, and we can see that this 2018 is 100, and we can look at Q2 last year. Yes, there was a positive dynamics, but if we look at the retroactive peaks of investment activities in 2019, we are still in investment stagnation. If this graph continued to 2012-2014, when the investment activity was record-breaking in Belarus, then today we can say that the level of investment is 65% of those record-breaking periods. This is important to remember in order to understand what's going on today. On the one hand, there is some investment activity. However, the levels of this investment activity compared to what potentially can be afforded by the economy and what it achieved in record-breaking periods is much less. And this level of investment that we could see in 2019 was at a smaller volume of GDP. So the outcome is that the acceleration of investment activity today is not as large scale, and we should not be discussing any investment boom. Speaking of external demand, in this graph you can see the latest periods. We can see a significant increase in physical volumes of exports. Exports in physical volumes have reached the pre-war peak levels of 2021, when there was a significant refocusing of exports of oil products to Ukraine, and it was also the post-COVID situation. They facilitated increased demand. And this export increase is one of the key particularities of Q2. Since we do not have the disaggregation by data, they do not publish this information, but according to our data, according to our estimates, this exports burst is supported by exports to Russia. However, during the COVID-19 times, there's something wrong with my presentation. Yes, look at this graph. In 2021, in post-COVID boom, we could see a gap between exports and imports. There was a growing demand for Belarusian products, and there was an insignificant growth in imports. And the same situation was observed in 2023. This allowed to support favorable external position. In recent quarters, we can see that the situation is more standard when imports follow exports. And this is a new wave of external burst of external demand. It contributed to the economic activity, but on the other hand, the favorable external position was deteriorated by growing imports. What affects the financial markets and the foreign exchange rate and prices? We have not seen significant changes throughout this quarter. You can see blue bars. This is the price competitiveness index estimated by us based on the indicators shown as the line, and this index of price competitiveness of national producers shows whether national producers feel confident in international markets. For the last 3 quarters, this index is more or less the same, and it is moderately positive. This zone, moderately positive zone, is not as favorable as in 2022, but it is better than in pre-COVID times, prior to all shocks like in 2019. And in this moderately comfort zone, we stay to be. So the pricing conditions play neither in favor nor against the Belarusian exporters, and to some extent we can say that it has a neutral influence on the nominal external position. But there's a disclaimer. In the previous graph we showed the average values for the quarter, and inside the quarter there were some fluctuations which may indicate that there can be some follow-up trends in the following periods. I'd like to mention that the Belarusian ruble has started deteriorating, devaluating versus the Russian ruble. This is the red line, and the real effective exchange rate, this line that is close to the red line, this is the process. So we can see a new trend appearing. It will be valid for some time. This inertia will stay for a while, and in the end I will dwell on the risks that can compromise it. And ultimately, if we speak about the situation of the nominal external position, it is significant for the current situation. Belarus cannot afford a significant deficit because Belarus has a limited capacity to finance this domestic deficit. Yes, the nominal deficit can be seen as a safe zone, not threatening deficit. However, considering that there is no wise, explainable, reasonable ways to finance this, Belarus cannot issue euro bonds like it was in 2020. It is hardly achievable, and the deficit in foreign trade under the current account can be under significant threat. In Q2, no significant deterioration happened. The physical volumes were aligned, as well as prices, which have not changed. Here we have the balance of trade and balance in trade in goods and services and balance of trade and services. And red bars are without seasonable adjustment. But in case of seasonable adjustment, the external position in nominal terms has not significantly changed its value, but there's a gradual deteriorating trend. If we get back retroactively, we can see this deterioration trend for the last 1.5 years continues. Now I'm moving to the conclusions of my presentation. This is moving from the current period to the future. There was a significant growth in Q2. We could see new record-breaking figures, but all the concerns expressed in Q4 last year, or even earlier, in Q4 we could see this evidently. We mentioned those things in early 2022 and 2023. These things are still relevant. The economy has already accumulated significant disproportions. The most scary thing is the dropping financial situation of firms. According to micro data, according to the reports of firms for the last half year published on the portal of financial markets, and we try to use micro statistics to evaluate whether the financial situation of firms is close to some critical limit. Well, macro statistics, like the average temperature in the hospital, indicates clearly that the financial position of firms continues dropping. Moreover, as I demonstrated, there is a trend for deteriorating external position. It happens gradually, but still, since the sources of financing of foreign trade balance is deteriorating, and this is the thesis that has been discussed for more than a year. Anatoly refers to this. This is about the inflationary overhang. This problem is still relevant. All these three elements are significant barriers for maintaining growth. And I would also refer to the new risks that have started materializing in Q2. I have already mentioned it. These are the things, new visualized risks. I'm summarizing the previous trends. The growth that we can see today in the current time has prerequisites for slowing down. In the end of Q2 and already in Q3, we visualize new risks. And it's important to mention three risks on the screen, like tightening monetary policy in Russia. I would not focus on tightening its monetary policy. No, in Russia, the budget and credit stimuli reduce because of the policies adopted. This creates prerequisites for slowing down growth in the second half year for the Russian economy. And considering that the Belarusian economy in the external position very dependent on the Russian economy, this is an additional barrier, a new factor for cooling growth in the Belarusian economy. Moreover, in recent days or weeks, we can see that global economy has more tensions and concerns about the future of the global economy, and in particular for the Belarusian economy. This means risks, first of all, through the prices for commodities, energy commodities, and how these global impulses would affect the Russian economy. And there's another thing that is not really evident, like new sanctions. Many people who are engaged in production can hear for the last 2 years that the lacking technology lacking equipment repairs and new equipment can provoke technological disruptions. And the recent news of a breakdown at an oil refinery can show that the risk of inability to maintain equipment in a normal state is transferred to the economy. This has economic consequences, and this is more like a speculation without providing clear figures and facts. But this factor of limited investment, limited access to technology, is also a prerequisite for additional barriers on the way to economic activity. I will skip this slide. We mentioned this last time, so let me wrap up the facts and conclusions. The key trend of the second quarter is that the economy continued growing actively. It reached new highs, and it was even higher. The key factor was domestic demand, but external demand arithmetically also played its role. The role of external demand, growing demand for Belarusian produce, was compromised by the growing imports, but growing imports also accelerated economic activity. However, at that, this situation of external demand is what is threatening the growth that happened in Q2. This growth exists in an environment of multiple macroeconomic disproportions that have been accumulated. And first of all, I refer to the weakened and weakening financial position of firms, also the accumulated price overhang, and the threats in external demand. And in late Q2, early Q3, we can see new risks that emerge, and they can have an additional negative impact. And the authorities trying to find a balance among positive risks and the factors that can have a positive impact on the economy. These options are scarce for the authorities. There are some options, but they are scarce. Therefore, there is a conclusion that I draw. There's a high likelihood that the slowdown of economic activity will happen in Q2, and the trends visible in Q2 will lead to cooling growth, and the risks will threaten the situation. Thank you, Dmitry. I'd like to say that we are getting questions whether you will share the materials, the presentations. Yes, we will do that either today or tomorrow. And also on the website, we are going to see a short summary of our monitoring materials. We didn't do it before, but after the event is over, you'll be able to read a brief report on the event. Now I'm passing the floor to Anatoly Kharitonchik, who will discuss inflation and monetary environment. Yes, thank you, Olga. Hello, everyone. If we wrap up, the inflation landscape has not really changed if compared to Q1. Inflation stayed restrained amid blanket pricing controls. Price pressures have intensified because of the excess demand in the economy and labor market overheating and inflation increase in Russia. If prices stay being inflexible under the influence of administrative influence, then the inflation at the end of the year will be 5 to 7% and may accelerate in 2025 to 6 to 9%. Despite the strengthening inflationary risks, monetary policy and monetary conditions were moderately soft in Q2. Only in July, the National Bank quite late and in a quite limited way responded to the growing price threat by leveraging only supportive tools, but these measures could be enough for the interest rates on the loan and deposit market to get to the neutral levels at the end of the year. However, this neutral character of the monetary conditions is not enough for rapid return of the overheated economy to its balanced state. Inflation in Q2 was 6.1%. This is seasonally adjusted quarter on quarter. Inflation accelerated by 1% if compared to Q1. However, this acceleration is because of the dynamics in the non-base component. Look at the right figure, gray line. Non-core inflation grew significantly, and this was because fruits and vegetables got more expensive because they were challenged imports, and some prices, some regulated price and tariffs grew where the fuel cost increased. Core inflation remained low for considering the given macroeconomic conditions, and its annualized growth in Q2 was less than 5%. Extremely weak pricing dynamics stayed in non-foods. As far as goods are concerned, the price regulation system is operational. Non-regulated, unregulated services were getting more expensive much faster. If we remove very volatile international air travel and railroad travel, then inflation in unregulated services was 8%. Seasonally adjusted in Q2 as a result of a faster growth in prices for unregulated services if compared to non-food products. The very level of prices for unregulated services continued deviating upward from the non-food products, and this deviation is significant. This means that the economy has a significant inflation overhang, and the dynamics of this deviation means that this inflation overhang accumulates. The expansion of inflation overhang is because in the economy, pro-inflationary factors prevail. You can see this on the left. However, they do not fully translate into prices. This transfer is suppressed by the blanket price controls, and on the left-hand side, you can see it in the graph. This is the negative contribution to the core inflation. If we try to eliminate the influence of price controls, then in June, annual inflation would not be 5.8%, but it would be about 10-11%. So that would be almost 2 times higher than the actual inflation. Accelerated price growth was not accelerated by the inflationary sentiment and expectations of the households, but households perceive the pricing conditions being influenced by price controls. The National Bank expects that price growth would be 10.5% in Q2, and this is the minimum value through the last observation period since 2017. And I think that the positive things are over because the rest of the internal and external factors become more and more pro-inflationary, and this can be clearly seen on the left chart. Among external factors, we can mention the decreased oil rent for Belarusian oil refineries. I believe you know that starting from 2022, Belarusian oil refineries benefited because Russian Urals oil got much cheaper versus the global benchmark, which is the Brent oil. However, in 2024, the discount of the euros to Brent oil dropped 2 times, and this additional benefit has dropped, and the Russian Urals oil got more expensive, and Belarusian oil refineries could had higher costs. Therefore, the Belarusian government had to raise prices for fuel domestically. An additional inflationary pressure from the external sector was explained by supplies from China. There were tensions on the borders with the EU, and this kept inflation in cargo transportations at the level of two-digit figures in Q2 and in 2024. And an important external pro-inflationary factor is the growing prices in Russia. Inflation is about 9% quarter on quarter in annualized terms, and since price pressure from the Russian market translates into the Belarusian market with a significant time lag because of the price controls in Belarus, then again we can see a growing disparity of prices between Belarus and Russia, which means goods and prices in Russia become relatively expensive if compared to Belarusian ones, and this will be a factor of inflationary pressure on the Belarusian economy. Pro-inflationary influence was exercised by the exchange rate. The Belarusian ruble devaluated somewhat in Q2, and it is deviated by 1.5% to the level of the equilibrium real effective exchange rate. And this is the undervalue of the Belarusian ruble of 1.5%, and this corresponds to small pro-inflationary effects. And this affects the demand for currency in the local market. This demand is generated by firms. They buy foreign currency, and they're buying a foreign currency in Q2. If we seasonally adjust this, this has been relevant since 2010. And if we balance the operations of firms with operations of non-residents, they generated net supply of foreign currency in 2022. And today we can see a significant net purchases of foreign currency. This can be, and this is likely because of the condition of foreign trade, but this is not critical and significant. So there can be some single-time large purchases by large enterprises, and it is possible that foreign currency revenues are getting late to the country, and therefore firms have a higher demand for foreign currency. At the same time, households were net sellers of foreign currency. Probably this is because the number of real estate transactions grew, and term deposits of population were accelerated, so the interest rate was close to the neutral level. And speaking of the internal factors, we can refer to excess demand in the economy and overheated labor market. On the second graph, you can see that the output gap in Q2 expanded by more than 2 times if compared to Q1, and this is evaluated as 3.7% of GDP. This is a significant scale of economy overheating, but in my view, this is not critical yet. For example, in 2011 and in 2014, the Belarusian economy operated in the condition of overheating non-stop, and this overheating was over 5% of potential GDP. Nevertheless, in the environment of the deficit of production capacity, this economy factor becomes more pro-inflationary, and the key restraining factor on the supply side is the deficit of labor. Labor shortages have increased in Q2. On the right-hand side, you can see the red line. There was one unemployed per one vacancy. In this condition of the deficit of labor, firms have to sacrifice part of their profits to pay to salaries to workers. Salaries, as Dzmitry said, grew very actively, very intensively, and the very size of salaries has exceeded its inflationary neutral balanced level. You can see this on the right-hand side. This is the bluish area, and the labor market is more and more pro-inflationary. If we get back to the figure on the left, you can see that the key factor of economy overheating is excessively loose economic policy. Apart from the growth of salaries, this is translated in the expanded expansion of state budget expenses and the current expenditures, including social expenditures, and monetary conditions are still loose. But on the left-hand side, on the graph, you can see that their contribution to the positive output break has been decreasing. The National Bank has not taken any active actions in Q2 in monetary policy, and the interest rates on credits and deposits in nominal terms were close to the levels of the previous quarter. But if compared to previous year, these interest rates are much higher. Therefore, interest rates have been stimulating economic activity, but their deviation from the neutral values is much smaller. And for example, average loan interest rates are close to the neutral level. Nevertheless, getting to the neutral level is not enough to limit the risks of macro stability, which means that model calculations show that in order to cope with these inflationary threats, the interbank interest rate had to be around 9% or even higher, but not 5% as it was in fact. Since the interest rates were not limiters, firms and households could satisfy their very high demand for loans amid a strong demand for their products produced and high consumer activity. On the left-hand side, you can see that the volume of new loans to GDP is close to multi-year peak, and this is 74% in Q2. Amid a higher demand for loans, the abroad money supply was very high, however less than last year. In my view, according to available data, credit activity grows because of the current economic conditions. Emission financing continues, but its pace has not accelerated. And the National Bank only in July, in a limited way, responded to growing inflation risks. For that, the National Bank increased the overnight loan interest rate and the market loan rates were increased by half pp, and the foreign currency reserving norm was increased, which will remove 400 to 500 million of excess liquidity from the banking sector. And considering available resources needed by banks to ensure uninterruptible operations, this will bring us to liquidation of excess liquidity by mid-August. This will increase the interbank interest rate and the deposit and credit interest rates. If the National Bank does not adhere to rules, does not exercise the monetary politics in a different way, these interest rates will be volatile, and they will grow from 4 to 6% in the first half year to 6 to 8% in the second half year. So market loan rates may grow from 10 to 12% at the end of the year, and in Belarusian ruble deposits, this will grow from 6.5% to 8.5%. Such a growth in interest rates will mean continued decreasing of stimuli for economic activity from their side. On the left-hand side, you can see that monetary conditions, as far as the interest rates are concerned, will get closer to the neutral values in the second half of 2024 and in 2025. The National Bank may continue exercising prudential measures in the future. However, there are little grounds to expect that the regulator is going to use the monetary policy as a limiting factor. Interest rates will continue growing in the future, considering the inflationary risks. This narrowing of monetary risks will weaken the dynamics of loans and domestic demand if considering the expected decrease in salaries growth and change in demand in Russia and the follow-up adjustments, the scale of this economy overheating may get smaller in the second half of the year. Output gap is forecasted close to 3% in the second half year. You can see this on the right-hand side on the graph. And this excess demand is aligned with maintaining GDP volumes close to the record-breaking level in Q2, and its growth in general at the end of the year will be around 4%. Therefore, in 2025, this excess demand can continue decreasing in the base scenario. Therefore, the output gap will get down to 2 to 3%, which means the GDP growth by 0.5 up to 1.5%. Decreasing the scope of of overheating of the economy will continue this process. Monetary conditions will get closer to neutral, but they will be not limiting. Salaries growth will slow down growth, but still growth will be much higher than the inflationary neutral level amid labor shortages, and budget costs will grow, and directed lending will continue. Therefore, pressures on the costs from excess demand will continue in the forecastable future and will be elevated. In this condition, the Belarusian ruble has a potential for weakening. I evaluate this under the applied methodology approach. So this will be about 4% at the end of 2024. So the Belarusian ruble may lose 4% in the basket of currencies and about 6% in 2025. This weakening of the Belarusian ruble will preserve its undervaluation at about 1 to 2%, and this will mean that the contribution of the foreign exchange rate to inflation will continue being positive in the forecasted future, and this will be strengthened by growing inflation in Russia. As said, and additionally, pro-inflationary pressure will continue from excess demand and overheated market of labor. And in addition, constant adaptation to new sanctions that challenge supply chains and logistics and financial transactions, these will have additional pressure on costs and consumer prices. And inflation will be restrained by pricing controls. The base scenario says that this will be still continued until the end of the presidential election campaign in 2025. So base inflation will be 5 to 7% at the end of 2024. Gradually, this accumulated inflation of a hang will leak to prices, and in 2025, inflation can get as high as 6 to 9%. The multiple pro-inflationary factors and price growth depend on the financial situation of firms and its change, and we can actually move to risks now. And the balance of risks for inflation, it is shifted towards pro-inflationary ones. First of all, the excess demand could exceed baseline estimates if domestic economic policy will continue being extremely soft. Then the problem of shortage of workers will be very acute, and increased demand for inputs will pressure the Belarusian ruble exchange rate. Therefore, the pressure on costs will be high, as well as the consumer prices. Adjustment of the supply side of producers of goods and services will lag behind. So possibly, and very likely, this will happen under intensified problems with imports. If there's a significant deterioration in external conditions, and if the demand in the economy stays high amid soft economic policy without corresponding expansion of production capacity, then the price pressure will get higher. Pro-inflationary risks are associated with the likelihood of long-term preservation of high inflation in Russia and the disturbances in global supply chains. Speaking of the disinflationary risks, we could mention the probability of abrupt cooling of demand in Belarus and Russia, and this adjustment of supply to demand can happen faster than expected in the base scenario. If investment goes to labor productivity and production capacity, and if the investments turn out to be efficient. Thank you. Thank you, Anatoly. We have quite a lot of questions, and we have some 20 minutes left, so we'll do our best to answer all the questions. In Zoom, we have two questions. They are very much alike. First of all, the Prime Minister of Belarus said today that our economic system will not get overheated. How can you comment this? And another question. 20 minutes prior to our meeting, the government posted the video of Prime Minister who comments economic overheating, and he says that the situation is under control, the economy is in the green zone. How do you see the plans of the government for the next year, like with GDP growth of 4.1% and inflation of 5% a year? Okay, thank you for your questions. It's hard for me to say what the Prime Minister bases his estimates on. The methodology used in my assessments are presented on the website of Birok. So we can see that there is overheating in the economy, and this overheating is significant. We can also see this through indirect indicators in the labor market. There is a high deficit. The unemployment level is historically low. It is 3%. It is less than the natural level. There's less than one unemployed per one vacancy. This is the historical low. If we look at the graph of consumption of households, then we can say that this has increased by more than 18%, and we can see that this was a significant growth. Salaries have added more than 22%. They have grown by 22%. And we can see that in unregulated services, the pace of inflation remains high. This is much higher than the goal of 6 or 5%. It's hard for us to say what is the real figure, but this is much higher than the price growth for non-food products. Because these food products, non-food products, they are under blanket price controls. And the financial situation of companies, external trade, they are not perfect. So the Belarusian economy is in the overheated state. I believe that this is significant but not critical. I dare to bring in more. Look, I will be less politically correct. I believe that Anatoly presented the data, visualizing and giving us no reason to say that, to adamantly say that the Belarusian economy is overheated. My statistics and indicators show that the economy is overheated. A year ago, I surveyed economists. All of them didn't want their names to be disclosed. And on the one hand, the Belarusian economy was self-calming. They said that the economy felt good in 2020, 2021, 2022, and I wanted to discuss possible threats with this economic community. And this threat is not discussed in the public. One of the economists said that the period of COVID-19 and after sanctions were introduced, this caused false expectations of the government that we could avoid any problem because we don't know them. And this brings us to the false conclusion that everything is nice. Well, maybe the words of the Prime Minister are supported by something, but there are more and more manifestations of what I have said. They try to neglect the facts. If the facts contradict the reality, then these are bad facts, as they say, and this can become a significant threat for future periods. Yes, there was the second part of the question about the plans of the government for next year. Let me illustrate this by giving you the following example. The government plans the economy to grow by 4%, a bit more, next year, and there's a problem. If we take our estimates and the estimates of the National Bank, you can take this from the inflation report, the potential GDP growth. GDP that does not generate macroeconomic disbalances is 1 to 2% a year. We can assume that this is a bit higher due to the structural transformation, but this is not 4%. If we consider that the economy is overheated, this is not what I say, only the National Bank and its report shows that the output gap is 3% or even more. So they also evaluate it as seriously overheated. Therefore, capacity for growing faster than the potential, there is no prerequisites for that. And to continue this 4% growth when the potential is 1.2%, this will mean that this overheating will intensify and grow to critical levels, and then we can expect some crisis phenomena. And in order to grow that way, when you have a deficit production capacity, you have to grow your productivity of labor somehow, and you have to grow it very efficiently, and you have to liquidate all these production limitations. This does not look possible. Well, I cannot say that this will not be possible at all, but the likelihood of this scenario, of this government scenario, seems very low. And in terms of alignment, like inflation 5%, GDP 4%, this looks somewhat strange. If you stimulate the economy by 4%, if you overheat this significantly, then the price pressures will be elevated. And ensuring this inflation by blanket price controls will be a more and more risky game. It's hard to say how long Belarusian economy and Belarusian firms can survive under the growing price pressures and deteriorating position of firms. Any strong shock will mean that this price regulation will have to be abandoned or made softer significantly, and then we will see a significant inflation overhang, because according to my estimates, inflation overhang is at least 6%. I have two more words. The changing external environment is also significant. I'm not speaking about the global environment even. I'm more optimistic about it. I don't think that there is the threat of global recession. I speculated in the media. Well, there is such a threat, but it is not that high. But I'm speaking about the changes in the Russian economy, what happens. And Anatoly referred to this as well as I did. There is a very high likelihood for prerequisites to cool the economic activity down. And for Belarus, this means that, yes, for the last few quarters, the domestic demand heated the Belarusian economy. But this possibility of heating up domestic demand is also supported by the attractive external position, which means high demand from Russia. If this basement is taken out, then the entire building will collapse. This building today enables us to demonstrate high growth. This will not be the house of cards collapse, but this will mean significant threats and challenges and an inability to withstand these disproportions. Therefore, in the condition of weakened growth in Russia, to ensure such growth pace in Belarus will be very, very ambitious task. Let's put it this way, which is politically correct. Thank you all who ask questions during registration. Our experts do their best to consider your questions when making their presentations. But let me voice the questions that have not been answered by the presentations. What happens to prices if they are freed? Well, I think I have already answered that. The inflation overhang is at least 6% in my estimates. Therefore, if we release prices, this will materialize, and it's hard to say how fast. This will happen gradually. I don't think that prices will be fully freed. But this will take some time, and this will happen. How people feel themselves, is there any difference between regions of the country? In the regions of the country, the consumer confidence index is the highest in the eastern parts of the country, Mogilov and Gomel Oblast, and some places in Minsk Oblast. And you can look at the bulletin for details, and we will publish the bulletin soon. Thank you. Can you describe the trends in the economy this year? I think that this is what our presentations were about. And the transit from China, how much, what is its role? I would break this answer into two parts. If we convert this into figures on GDP scale, this is insignificant. Or let me say that there are various indicators that measure the importance of Belarusian transit as the share of the entire Chinese exports to Europe. The majority of indicators show that this is 4 to 5% of, Belarusian railways host 4 or 5% of Chinese exports to Europe. For Belarus, this scope of transit that can be identified in the data, if we translate this into the GDP scale, then this is up to 1% of GDP. Considering indirect effects between sectors, even if we take some radical assessments, this can be up to 2.5% of GDP. These are not large figures, not high figures, and we can look at it retroactively. Like after all embargoes were introduced, the volumes dropped. This has never been about two-digit figures. But there's another side of the coin, and I think that this is more important. Chinese transit is the basis for the Chinese interest in Belarus. There are no many projects of the kind in Belarus, and it's important for Belarus to reborn them, like the Great Stone area, the hopes for Chinese investments. And if this foundation of Chinese transit is not there, then this will destroy the basis, the basement for the authorities to expand the Chinese influence in other domains. And in the future, this influence can be significant. Thank you. There's another question asked in registration. Liquidation of micro enterprises and individual entrepreneurs in Belarus that are guided by new legislation, what this will bring to. Frankly speaking, I do not think that in the forecasted horizon, which is 2024, 2025, we will see significant macroeconomic effects of these factors. Naturally, some of the people will be affected to smaller or larger extent, but in general, for macro indicators, I don't think this will have a significant effect. But these measures are a continuation of this systematic policy. For personalistic political regimes like in Belarus, such a significant share of entrepreneurs and private business people is not what is a desired state, because entrepreneurship can generate sustainable growth if institutions are established to support entrepreneurship and to support its stimuli. And this also facilitates values like the freedom of expression, willingness to participate in political changes, to change the powers, political thinking. This is not desired. For such regimes, it's important to maintain some proportion. Creativity is needed on the one hand to generate some growth, at least some innovations, some catching up things, but not on a large scale, so they shall not cross the limit. And will the military-industrial complex continue developing in Belarus? Do we have experts on that? I don't know anything about the military-industrial complex, but Anatoly has mentioned it like adjustment of supply to demand. It is very likely that a significant share of demand in Russia for Belarusian products, to some extent, is associated with the military demand of Russia. It's not only about the produce of the military-industrial complex. I can imagine that textiles, food, etc., production can be supplied there. There's a dilemma for those enterprises that, on the one hand, fill this demand today, but the production capacity is limited. How should they see this demand? As something temporary or something permanent? If the balance of risk is in favor of something constant, then we can assume that they will decide to invest in the military-industrial complex, and there will be demand for this produce. But what will be the outcome of this decision? It all depends on the political prospects, whether this will be the supposing growth or not. So in summary, when answering this question, I would say that at least one of the scenarios expecting the activation of investment in the military-industrial complex is possible. This is an option. But on the other hand, to what extent can we ensure further investment boom? And in my presentation, I paid your attention on the long investment graph. All attempts of the government to accelerate investment in previous years resembled this famous idea of new investment cycle. Chervakov, Minister of Economy, was promoting it. It is stuck by very high limitations. For quite a while, the banks were not willing to provide loans, and today the monetary conditions are soft, and this barrier has been removed for a while. But there's another fundamental barrier, it started in 2008 and 2011. This is the inability to make investments efficiently translated into production capacity. If we say, let's expand our production capacity, let's expand production capacity in the military-industrial complex, and let's ensure the corresponding technological processes, and then we can see for the last 15 years to say and to do in Belarus, these are two different things. Therefore, this can be the desire to do that, but whether they can implement this decision, enforce this decision, this is a big question. Okay, thank you. There were also questions about the forecasted inflation for 2024-2025. You have already answered this question in detail, and about speaking of the Belarusian ruble exchange rate in 2024 and 25 have been dwelled on. So let's look at other questions, please. I hope that the basis of the analysis of changes in the indicators like GDP was the comparative prices. Yes, indeed. Comparative GDP is measured in comparative prices, and we used the prices of 2018, and the source is Belstat. This is a traditional methodology. I don't think this deserves explanation, but this is a short answer. Naturally, we do it. Please explain how high inflation in Russia will affect the economy of Belarus. I think that I have already answered this question. This is an important pro-inflationary factor today and in the future. You can see that this green bar stays positive all the time, and significantly positive. So this will be pro-inflationary for the Belarusian market. There's another thing. This growing gap presented by Anatoly is also a threat for deteriorating price competitiveness of Belarusian producers. Today, when Russian prices grow or have grown in recent periods by more than Belarusian prices, this improves the situation for Belarusian producers. But these prices will catch up in Belarus if borders are opened despite directive lending, when goods can travel freely. And I can assume that this can be used, there can be various tools used to limit this process, but in the last 15 years in Belarus, especially in the last decade, when the customs union was established still to limit prices endlessly when prices changed in Russia, this is impossible. So the question is about the time lag, whether this can be happening not so fast to adjust to Russian prices, but this will definitely happen. They will not be able to hold Belarusian prices at a different level for a long time. This will not happen. So I get back to my second thesis. In the second quarter, we can see that the Belarusian ruble got more expensive if compared to the Russian ruble. Probably this is because Russian inflation was higher than Belarusian inflation. But in the follow-up periods, I cannot guarantee that this will happen in Q3. But starting from Q3 and in Q4 and later, when the Belarusian economy overhang will translate into actual prices, this will show us another side of the coin. Belarusian prices will grow faster, will catch up with Russian prices, and all these temporary benefits in price conditions that Belarusian producers enjoy today in the Russian market will start melting down. This will be a shock, and as we said, the Russian economy is likely to slow down, so this will affect the external position of Belarus as well. I have another comment about what Dmitry says. In the inflation overhang published in Russian and English in the website of Berok, we can see a graph showing the price ratios for various goods and food supplied to the Russian market, so prices in Belarus and Russia. We can see that this gap started expanding. You can look at the inflation overview, which has been published on our website. So our time is up, and we still have 5 questions. The contribution of other factors and the output gap limitation expanded the output gap in Q2, and why output gap is going to be liquidated so slow. Thank you for your questions. Speaking of the contribution of other factors, indeed, you can see that on the left-hand side, the figure shows you that they have evaporated practically. This is mostly because of the non-considered models and factors on the output gap on GDP growth. As Dmitry has said, GDP grew very rapidly in Q2, much faster than the balanced rates, and what has not been included in the model, and which is difficult to consider, this is the output of agriculture that grew up so fast. But since this is sustainable, we can see a shift in the sowing and plowing and the harvesting campaigns and excessive growth in Belarus and in Russia that also facilitated good growth in cattle breeding and in food industry. Moreover, there was an anomaly growth, in my opinion, in construction and investment. Probably these were single-time effects when investments accumulated, but they portrayed in the reporting in Q2, which could be reflected in the negative contribution in bridging the output gap in previous periods and stopping it in the current quarter. But we should follow these current investments. If this growth is stable, well, I have no reasons to believe that this will be high and stable, but if this happens, we can be speaking about a higher potential level of output in Belarus. Answering your second question, why the output gap is so slowly bridged in the forecast, as said in the presentation, this is because monetary conditions are forecasted, are expected to get closer to the neutral level. On the left-hand side, you can see this, but this will not be limiting, so their contribution to output gap will be positive. Moreover, in the conditions of the electoral campaign, salaries and social expenditures will grow or will remain at a relatively high level. And there are small reasons to believe that directed lending will get smaller. Moreover, the level of salaries deviated upward from the balanced level, and the labor shortages will not evaporate unless there's a shock and there is no more demand for labor. But these are very, very big shocks and risks. So this will cause pressures on the economy, and the economy will get back to the balanced level gradually. But for this to happen faster, it is necessary or there can be two options. First, this is rapid adjustment of the supply side, but I can see this as unlikely because this requires significant investment and investment efficiency, but this is not clear whether this demand is stable, the demand that we can see in Belarus and in Russia, and you can invest in your production capacity and then it will be needless in the future. Second, this can be abrupt cooling down of demand. There can be strengthening of the monetary policy, etc. In 2023, there was such an option because the output gap was not so significant. And today, abrupt cooling down of demand will lead to the scenario of very deep depression, a recession in the economy. Whether firms and banks can survive it without launching a full-scale financial crisis, this is a big question. So this is a risk scenario, but I would not consider this as the base scenario. What is the inflation forecast for Belarus was used here? In Russia, for 2024, at the end of the year, it was 7.5% inflation. Consumer inflation in 2025, if I'm not mistaken, it is 4.5%, a bit more than the target of 4%. Why other factors will exhaust in this composition of inflation? It's hard for me to answer this question because I cannot see them rapidly exhausting themselves. This happens gradually. In Q3, they stay at the same level. In Q4, they get a bit lower, but then I expect that price controls will continue. But as the financial standing of firms deteriorates, there will be some measures taken. And after the electoral cycle is over, this will happen faster. But this is what the base scenario says. If demand for foreign currency was ad hoc, then why Belarusian ruble will deteriorate in the forecast? Well, probably you did not get me right. I said that one of the factors of this record-breaking volume of net purchase of foreign currency by firms could be ad hoc, single-time operations. But take a look at the graph on the right. Net purchases of foreign currencies by firms is stable, but in Q2 it expanded. So probably this happened because of the ad hoc operations. But if we balance this with the transactions of non-residents, and we do this because the foreign supply channels have been re-engineered after February 2022, then since late 2023, we left net supply to net demand. It expanded in Q1 and Q2, being influenced by the deteriorating foreign trade position and probably because of the delays of foreign currency revenue inputs. And if this continues in the forecasted period, then the demand for imports will be elevated. But in Russia, they expect some slowdown of the demand. And then external trade can be deficit, like 0.1% or up to 2% of GDP, and this will mean moderate pressure on the Belarusian ruble exchange rate. But this is the base scenario. There are multiple shocks for this. However, Dzmitry dwelled on that, and these shocks can significantly deviate this forecast. Thank you all. We are 10 minutes behind schedule. Thank you all who are here, who were here, who asked questions. See you in a few months again. All the best to you. Thank you.